Greetings. Welcome to Someone Talked. I am your host, Dr. John C. McManus from Missouri S&T. Alongside, as always, are my good friends and partners in crime from the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, April Cheek Messe and John Long. How are you, my fine friends?
Wonderful, wonderful. What a fun discussion today. I'm excited.
This is going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fellow sitting next to me here is none other than Luke Hughes. And so Luke Hughes is you have a PhD in AI. You have a master's in organizational psychology, neurophysiology and psychology. So when you see the two of us alongside each other, just as your cue, he's the smart one. So he is the head of Green Tree Games LLC, and specifically the designer behind a game called Burden of Command. And the really cool thing about this, it's based on one of my books. So that'll be our theme today. The book is American Courage, American Carnage, which is a history of the 7th Infantry Regiment from the War of 1812 through World War II. Yeah, John's holding it up there. And it's the first of 2 volumes I wrote about the 7th Infantry, which is an amazing unit because it's been around since really the early national period, fought in the Battle of New Orleans, and it remains on active duty today, over 200 years later. And it's been in pretty much every one of our wars in between. And so in World War II, the 7th Infantry was part of the 3rd Infantry Division and fought really the entire war from North Africa all the way through Sicily, Italy, South France, and then on into Germany and to Hitler's home in Berchtesgaden. And so it is, you can imagine, it's quite a dramatic story and really a tragic story on many levels. But it's an interesting sociological study to know something about who's in the regiment and why they fight, how they're equipped, how they're trained, where they go, what they do, how they're led. Their nickname, which remains in effect today, is the Cotton Balers. And so I just have to give a little background on that. As I mentioned, they fought at the Battle of New Orleans, and their regimental lore basically said they fought from the British from behind cotton bales. And so it's one of the first things I tackled in my research is whether that was actually true.
Yeah.
And it probably isn't, for the simple reason that cotton bales can catch fire when ordnance comes in. And so you don't necessarily want to be standing next to them. But what could have happened, I think, is, somewhat plausible. And you may know this, that the Americans fought from behind like trenches and ramparts in the Battle of New Orleans. And so it's very possible they would have used cotton bales to reinforce the muddy ramparts or whatever. But regardless, the name sticks to this day, and everywhere the unit goes, the cotton bale goes, this really ungainly 50-pound bale of cotton that some poor private has to drag around. So, yeah, so Luke really captured that in the spirit of the regiment and its fight in World War II in this game called Burden of Command, which is a role play game in which basically you're a company commander in the 7th Infantry in World War II. So how did that come about for you?
Well, the key thing I want to say about my background, I have all that psychology stuff. That's interesting in the sense that I was very interested to look, as he says, the human qualities of war, not only the relationships, but, first, your men must respect you if you're going to lead, right? They must trust you. And those are actually mechanical concepts in the game, but also in the sense of, battlefield might be a little scary place, right? Fear might have a role, but also, frankly, the embarrassment, right? That you don't want to be the one who shows the yellow feather, to use a British term, right? That when everybody stands up to go, you stand up to go too. Your bond to your fellow soldiers. So how did it happen for me? I would say first, I had an intrinsic interest in that. Secondly, I had an interest in leadership. I worked in the business world for Accenture for a while as a director of research. And of course, you want to believe you're leading your organization. So I was always interested in leadership. And then I think most fundamentally, this connection I wanted to point out is my father was also not only a World War II vet, Thomas Park Hughes, but an historian, a professional historian like John. He helped found a field called the history of technology. Okay, Dad, so I gave you credit there. Don't remember that. So my point is, and my mom, by the way, was a nurse in World War II. I grew up in the context of history. I mean, Dad would give his practice lectures for the next day at the dinner table at night. So I went into the archives for Thomas Edison. Pretty cool at 12, only to Xerox, unfortunately, but still very cool. And so history was always sort of in my blood in some sense. So when I was playing a game that's very history focused called Crusader Kings. Some people who are gamers may recognize that. It's late medieval. You play noble families in Europe. And it struck me suddenly, well, what if I was leading not a band of nobles across Europe, but a band of brothers, to use an obvious metaphor, a band of officers across Europe. That was kind of the conception of the game, but obviously that heavy history context was getting to me, the leadership concept, and again, the psychology quality. And then I started looking around, well, what would be an interesting unit to follow? Because I wasn't going to just make up some, fight in Europe. I wanted to follow a real unit, right? History connection was core. So I'm looking around, and that's when I, came across John as a celebrated historian and the Cotton Balers, because, as John points out, not only this fascinating quality being such a long-lived regiment for the U.S., but they, along with the 1st Infantry Division, are one of the very first divisions to be in combat in Morocco, Operation Torch, and then they're there the whole rest of the war from the U.S. standpoint all the way to Hitler's Eagle Nest. So that, from my standpoint, was perfect, because follow an epic journey for the player from inexperienced, fighting Vichy French of all things, to probably fighting some of the best German units along the course of the war.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing when you think about it. And you think about the foundation of this unit, even coming into World War II. So the 7th Infantry Regiment has more battle streamers than any other infantry unit in the United States Army.
Wow. And
it has the second most Medal of Honor recipients. It had, of course, fought in the Mexican-American War, really had a major role in the Mexican-American War, especially at the Battle of Cerro Gordo, which is a key moment in that war. It fought in the Civil War in famous battles like Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, in which the unit was basically shattered. It was part of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Yeah, I mean, it actually, the 7th Infantry Regiment, it's confusing because it's often conflated with the 7th Cavalry Regiment, two completely different organizations. But the 7th Infantry Regiment, one of the reasons why things are so bad for Custer is he'd not waited to hook up with the 7th Infantry Regiment, and thus went in and attacked a superior force. But there was some element of the 7th Cavalry that was left under a guy named Major Marcus Reno, and the 7th Infantry Regiment hooked up with them the next day after the Custer disaster, and really helps kind of save the day there. Then the Spanish-American War, they have a major role in the fighting in Cuba. So by World War I, when the Army starts to stand up the modern divisions that we have now, they become affiliated with the 3rd Infantry Division, and of course had fought in some of the key battles now, or Rock of the Marne, exactly. So the Second Battle of the Marne, the 7th Regiment had played a key role there. So I'm saying all that as a kind of backgrounder to where we are in World War II, that this is a unit that's been a continuous active service. By the time we get to North Africa and Sicily, then yes, you've got that kind of regular Army tradition and kind of culture, but you also have obviously a lot of new volunteers and draftees post Pearl Harbor, and so I think it's a really interesting dynamic. Of course, too, remember it's a segregated army at that point too in the infantry, and so it's pretty much I'll say non-black, because it's mostly white. But if you're Latino, if you happen to be Asian American or whatever, you could be part of this regiment, Native American. But those were the exclusionary practices of the time. But that's who's in the unit. And how are they trained up? They're very much trained up for amphibious, which is one of the reasons why they're chosen alongside the Big Red One to land in Morocco with Operation Torch. Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk more about the social and cultural aspects of the game, which I really love. But I want to go back for just a minute, John, and ask you, because the 7th Infantry Regiment has been in, as you say, continuous active service for over 200 years. So how did you discover the story of the 7th Infantry Regiment? You can talk a little bit how you came about that. And Luke, how did you discover John? So if y'all could address that.
so the origin story for this, it's funny. This is many years ago. I live in St. Louis. My wife Nancy and I were at a restaurant in St. Louis having dinner one night, and it's funny because Luke of course is visiting here in St. Louis because we had an event at the St. Louis County Library, in which we talked about the game and my book, and it was a blast. And we went to the same restaurant where Nancy and I had dinner all those years ago, and she asked me that night. She said, has there been any infantry unit that's been in all our wars since the American Revolution? And I'm like, wow, that is a great question. And so I think that she wasn't quite ready for the answer in a sense of what that meant and what it was.
It took a few years to answer the question.
it took decades almost, and a complete kind of.
How long did it take?
Well, this the research is always ongoing for me because I'm the historian of the 7th Infantry. But at the same time, in terms of the tangible writing of these books, we're talking about the better part of a decade or so. And then one of the major reasons for that is, of course, then the 21st century wars interceded. And I felt that that needed to be covered as well. So obviously there was already enough history by the time I came to it, and that evening that she asked me the question, I probably stayed up until 4 a.m. or something, searching for this kind of thing.
There's a little passion for
so
history.
Yeah, a little bit and total nerdery, I guess. But the more I checked into like the older regiments, the more I just saw the 7th constantly in the mix. Always in our wars, always in key situations. As a kind of American historian, I found that fascinating and felt that we could really explore our history quite well by looking at this regiment. And the other thing about them, when you look at like the old regular Army regiments, many of which of course still exist to this day, like the 8th Infantry or the 3rd or whatever, the 7th, unlike pretty much every other one, had served in both Korea and Vietnam. Usually it was one or the other because you'd be maybe part of NATO forces or you would be, in Korea or Vietnam at the time. The 7th was in both. And that appealed to me as a modern oriented historian. And I love that kind of continuity. So it was really cool because researching the history of this regiment takes us to different archives and whatnot, but also it's a personal thing. Because I ended up interviewing everything from World War II veterans to people who were active duty and the age of my students and everything in between, and that was a generational kind of experience. But I didn't have a lot of experience in digging around into like early 19th century archives and whatnot. I was more of a trained to be a 20th century historian, and it was really neat because when you research the 7th Infantry in the War of 1812, you find some of the original materials that I don't know that had been looked at almost since. Wonderful. Yeah, so they would have the way they kept records, it'd be like a company book. And the companies were just named after the commander. So it'd be like, okay, that's Captain so-and-so's company, and you'd look in the book, and it's the original notations from 1814 and 15, and they're writing about the malfeasance that some of these guys got into in New Orleans. This is the National Archives in Washington, D.C.
Really? So it's in D.C.?
Yeah, the main building in D.C. The more modern records, like World War I and after, are at College Park. So they're split in two. So I was at both, in chasing this down. But it's just really neat because it was something that I needed to maybe round out maybe my historical understanding, and then of course like visiting the Little Bighorn battlefield and another battlefield at a place called the Battle of Big Hole where they fought was a very moving experience. Not only to see the terrain, but also like a lot of the firsthand material from the soldiers who were there, and then the Native Americans who fought with them. I mean, it's a mixture, so. It was just such a fascinating journey by the time we even get to World War II. So you can only imagine how incredibly compelling this was for me as really a World War II oriented historian, to see that background that leads us to this point,
Can I add something to that? I'm going to now, this is the big reveal. I've been saving this for already, my God, we're deep into the podcast. For the audience today, I'm going to pretend I had psychiatry training, but actually I didn't. I only had psychology, much less interesting. But I'm pretending I have a deep psychological insight on Dr. McManus revealed today. I'm revealing for this audience only that he might be passionate about history. I mean, did you notice the till 4 a.m. I'm not sure everybody would do it till 4 a.m. But what was wonderful working with him, and I saw last night, was, I'm pretty passionate about history from a family background, but not just us, his audience last night, and I'm going to bet people listening to this podcast, passionate about history. There was a long line of people going up to John last night and pursuing their own personal history things, what the history of their family, the records. I heard some guy trying to track down the merchant marine of his family. So I bet quite a few in the audience are like that too. And John helped us do something that I can say for me was personally in the same way, very exciting. And also for the team, was he pointed us early on how to get into the archives. So I hired 2 archivists to go into the National Archives to retrieve digitally, meaning they were there with the real records like John, but to take pictures of the actual reports of captains like you are in the game at the beaches on Morocco. What was their experience, where it went wrong, and a lot went wrong. To the photos we have in the game, 1,500 photos, many of which may have never been seen except by people like John who could get into the archives. And I can tell you, it was deeply, so Sherlock Holmes exciting. You'd get one of these reports. I remember early on in the project, I'm reading some report and it refers to like coastal guns at Fadala and Morocco. And I'm like, oh, I got to find those. I get on Google Earth. Could that be it? Is that the ruin? Because you can wander around Google Earth. And then 5 hours later, like, I'm never going to get through this project if I try to answer these really history geek cool questions. But one last thing I'll add is our team has a lot of passionate volunteers. People who just saw the concept of the game and wanted to help. Many of them vets, already doing a lot, already working for Red Cross, but they geeked out too, right? The vets. I discovered during the project that the closet geeks of the services are the Marines. We had a Marine volunteer colonel and major volunteer himself early on to help us on all this kind of research and reading through the reports. And for you in the game, we actually put many of those reports. And now I'll close on the most exciting, deep insight that possibly you missed, John, on the Morocco beaches. What in the long list of lessons learned did the 7th have after Morocco? I should make this a test question for him, but I'll be kind. This is brutal. Turns out, key lesson learned, which honestly I believe was more coffee for the next invasion, etc. And probably that was quite important.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, let me throw in then, since Luke brought it up, Operation Torch, which is their baptism of fire for World War II. And by the way, the book, I certainly recommend to our listeners. It covers a lot of early history that I really enjoyed reading because, I obviously have to read a lot of World War II for my job, but something on the Mexican War. I was just refreshing to me or the War of 1812. But back to World War II, which of course is the subject of our podcast for the most part. How did the 7th perform in Operation Torch?
Great question.
North Africa, and what lessons did they need to learn for later in the war?
Yeah, there were a lot of lessons about amphibious warfare that come through for them. It was the landing itself was quite disorganized. It was a nighttime landing in the darkness, and that led to a lot of confusion. The landing craft themselves did not hold up particularly well. They landed on a rocky coast. There was a lot of coordination they had to do with the Navy. I mean, of course, we're talking really early in the war. This is less than a year after Pearl Harbor when this happened. So this is pretty formative. I think all things considered, they do an awfully nice job. They had to learn a lot about tactical movement. They got ashore okay. I mean, and the level of opposition is not high compared to the Germans. If we really look at the so-called French situation, it's a colonial situation. And so, the French are interlopers in Morocco, really. And so are you fighting local guys who really want to fight you or not? Are there French officers or, and then this is all in the game too, this whole dynamic. Right. And
are they going to fight?
Are they going to fight? Who are they? And of course, France and the U.S. are not supposed to be enemies, and you have that in there too. So the cotton balers were not tested that much as they could have been. It didn't mean it was a walkover, by the way. I mean, there were a lot of ways to get killed and hurt, and so they're going to have to learn a lot about how quickly they're going to have to move, what kind of firepower they're going to need in terms of support. The coordination with artillery, anti-tank weaponry. So it's a close air support.
Learn that. Yes.
It's a pretty formative operation. Though successful, it's about 3 to 5 days of fighting roughly, and it's just the beginning. So Luke mentioned the captain's reports. That comes out of John's question. That whole thing of like, okay, what went wrong? That was really what those captains. It was each company commander that was ordered to basically write about their experiences because they had perceived that this thing hadn't been managed very well. They being the higher command, and so they wanted that firsthand sense. They were investigating. So it told you the U.S. Army was trying to learn its lessons, and you'll see that through the whole war, of course, too. But at this very early point. But the cool thing is for historians like us, those are great sources. I mean, these are the guys who are just, leading troops, and here they are writing soon after the fact. Yes, there's a lot of self-justification in it, no question, but it's very valuable. So the archival material, that your people found is exactly the primary source stuff that, and it's really neat because you can write a book on it like I did, or you can use it for a video game like you did. And it's the same kind of exploration, I think, so yeah, that was, so I think Torch is a sort of nice first step for the cotton balers, but they're nowhere near in terms of quality of what they're going to be going forward.
I'd love to follow up on that from the game standpoint, right? So John, that's a really, that question has not been asked specifically and allows me to say some new things, I think. So I remember, maybe John, you'll know what book I'm referencing. There was a more strategic on the war, American involvement book, and its thesis was that the Americans were very lucky in their learning curve. Meaning there was, and I'd love you to comment on this, there was a debate, gung-ho, Americans gung-ho, maybe we should invade Europe right away in France, in 42, because we can do it because we're the Americans. But the Brits, I think, were advising, maybe not, having had Dieppe and so forth, which was well, John can say more. So fiasco is a good word. Landing. Anyway, so it ended up against the Vichy, questionably wanting to fight. So from the game design standpoint, frankly, it was perfect in the sense that it gave a natural learning curve for the player because the Vichy don't really want to fight. So in game terms, remember, it's a very psychology-oriented game. So morale, willingness to fight, I consider itself the central variable of the fighting. It's not how many bullets you have and what weapons you have. Obviously, that matters. Many games focus on that. We worry about that too. But a lot of it is, are they going to fire back? Are you going to fire back? Are you going to pretend to fight and not? There's some interesting books John can probably talk about how many people really were firing or not in World War II when given the chance to maybe my gun malfunctioned here. But it's a psychological test. I think the Americans did want to fight. Vichy French mostly didn't want to fight naturally. And so they're ready to surrender if you give them the opportunity often. Oops, bit of a spoiler there. So, but it scales up. So then they go to Sicily. The Italians, similar situation, late war. They're pretty keen not to continue. Germans, on their hand, are quite different. And the players think they're doing very well. They get into Italy. They start fighting the Germans. And it's a shock. And we get some interesting, in a positive sense, angry posts sometimes like, it's ridiculous. The Germans' MG-42s, which are machine guns, which were the real Americans were considered that, along with the 88s, which were their anti-tank, anti-aircraft guns, the most terrifying weapons for the Americans. I think probably the other forces fighting Germans too. Those are devastating weapons, and the players feel that, and their tactics have to adapt. So I just wanted to make a point that we were very fortunate in that learning curve as an army in the war, and much less importantly for the game as players.
Well, I have a question because I have to admit, Luke, I love the game. My 15-year-old and I got on, and we've been playing around with it.
We should replay that segment several times during the broadcast.
I love it, and I think, and he really enjoyed it too. And I think, his favorite part is actually that it is a decision-making game. That you are. This is not you're just going around and it's good guys versus bad guys and you're just shooting all the bad guys. It's you're really having to think. Your decisions have very real impact, and you're seeing some difficult circumstances and situations that you would have encountered. And so it's just much more realistic, and really enjoyed that. So were you, I know we're going to show some clips in a little bit, but for you, is that what sets Burden of Command apart from the rest of the games out there? And were you confident in this strategy when you started this process?
That's a great question. So first, let me give a little context for what's typical in games. And, games are complex. And let me put it this way, in case people don't realize, the game industry is now larger than music and movies combined. So you can guess that there might be a few games out there, and World War II's gotten some attention. But I would say really they broadly fall into two camps with some exceptions. One are first-person shooters. First I want to say they're obviously compelling games. Millions of people buy these games as games. They've obviously been brilliantly executed since they've done so well. So I'm not critiquing them as games. I'm now approaching them. I hope you heard earlier, by the way, as historians, he said, we historians. So I'm just going to keep saying as an historian, because I get to say that now. Honestly,
your dad.
That's the best part of this whole podcast. Right? Dad and mom are really happy right now. So see, mom and dad, I did actually do some historian. They wanted me, of course, to be an historian. Anyway, so typical first-person shooter, Medal of Honor, I played it, incredibly compelling from a experiential. In other words, the sound, the gunfire, the landing at the beach, the yells of, first-tier voice acting, the graphics. You feel like you're there within the limits, right? Like Saving Private Ryan beach scene. I mean, it's incredibly compelling. So I was like, oh my God, I feel I'm there, because I was studying other games and so forth. But then you're running around, you're doing very well, suddenly you get shot, screen goes, I think, a little gray, if I recall correctly, but 20 seconds later, you're back. That's a nice superpower. I bet the historical con builders wish they'd had that superpower.
Exactly.
Why weren't they equipped with that?
If only we thought of that.
After that, of course, it becomes what in the game industry is called a power trip, which it is, which is you are the all-powerful one because you're immortal. And of course, you're the one who feels like you pretty much took the beach. You made the key moments of decision, which are historically grounded, but strangely, you were there and make it happen. And you're all powerful because in some sense you are now. Now there's no burden there because nobody dies. In a nutshell, I mean, I'm sure there were some scripted ones, but really you're not going to die. In Burden of Command, you can definitely die. If you want to run around, play hero in front of the machine guns, you will die or certainly be severely wounded. And will your officers and men. And there, and you can see I'm starting to speak to the burden, right? That people die when you're a commander, even if you don't want them to, and you have to order them to their probable death sometimes. That's in a nutshell the burden of command. That tension between your responsibility to try to keep them alive, right? These guys had lives to live. They didn't want to come over and die in the beaches of Morocco, but they're willing to, but they'd rather not, right? Think of yourself. So that's a heavy. What burden is heavier than that direct responsibility for life? I'm kind of getting goosebumps just thinking about it again. So other type of game I would call are classically called war games. I imagine a few of your audience are those types. They focus on, you're a history geek. You already know the Battle of Gettysburg or whatever. You're moving, in my day, cardboard units, these days, digital units representing the divisions or pickets, division, and you're doing the charge. And for you, it's very exciting, but it's very abstract. You're seeing little counters and representations. Most people who don't already know the Battle of Gettysburg or the landings at Operation Torch, it looks very dull and abstract, and it probably is to you know what it represents. So those failed the test of either not very humanly, naturally engaging, the latter type, or honestly not very speaking to the burden. And I was very interested to speak to the burden, to the leadership. What was leadership? Because I knew I wanted to do something on leadership. I'd always been fascinated by that in war. And we spent a lot of time as a team, with many of the teams I think I referenced were vets, trying to decide, really, what is the burden of command? And now I think we can articulate it rather simply, but it took a long time to get to it. It's a tension, I think I've alluded to, between men and mission. And so literally in the game, you get victory conditions, of which you and your son saw that. One victory condition is the usual one. Take the hill, right? Capture the town, get the beach. Every game has that. And players are trained, go do that. And you lose if you don't. Burden of command, you have one more victory condition. Preserve the men, which was a moral responsibility, but also the army would prefer if you didn't get all their soldiers killed in the first fight. And you'd probably want that to be effective. So you're balancing this tension literally in the game. And we hope we teach you things like to withdraw, retreat, really, withdraw. In other words, wow, this hill's looking too hard to get, and my casualties are mounting. And if I persist, my judgment as the commander is I may lose both conditions. But maybe if I withdrew right now, I could at least preserve the men victory condition. Because we knew gamers, they've been trained like me too. I'm not criticizing anybody. Pavlovian dogs to win, win, win. You must win. You're the hero of the story. You must win. So how could we ever encourage them to withdraw? And so by giving them a way to win, which is to win with the men in a sense. But if you win with the men and you don't win on the objective, I'm sure the colonel will have some things in the game. He does in real life say something. If you win on the hill, but you sacrifice all the men getting there, Sergeant Grant will have some things to say to you because it's a role-playing game with named characters and dialogue and so forth.
Yeah. And it shows the cost. I mean, that's exactly it.
In a nutshell.
And so I want to add, too, that, you know, when Luke first came to me with the idea of basing this game on my book, one of the things I really liked is that it was not going to be one of those first-person shooter games. And again, I know they have their place and they're successful.
Exactly.
Certainly, I mean, they're very popular.
And they can engage people.
And it can definitely, yeah. And then there's some good that comes out of that. And I think, you know, for normal people, maybe it's a nice stress reliever too, in a way.
Absolutely.
But I also think there's some troubling aspects to a first-person shooter game that I think Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman in his work has shown very, very clearly. And and I also don't think that those games really portray the combat as it was, in the sense of everything Luke just mentioned. You're not immortal. You're not like the ultimate hero. You're not James Bond brought to Omaha Beach or Torch or Sicily or wherever. That's not what really happened. What really happened is the dynamic that I hope I've captured in my books, but also in Burden of Command, is just that. What do you pay the price for to take this hill?
American Carnage.
American Carnage. These are Americans, and
right.
These are people who can never be replaced, for their families especially.
Exactly.
And it's real stuff. And the enemy gets a vote, and you're dealing with people and trying to motivate them in a very difficult situation. What kind of moral dilemmas do you face? What kind of tactical dilemmas do you face? Interpersonal dilemmas. That's what comes to life. And I just don't think that when you're the all-powerful being killing all the Germans on Omaha Beach,
single-handed, pretty much.
I just find that troubling. Just me individually, that's my opinion. So what I love about this is it's incorporating all of the real history and all those real dilemmas in the real environment. So I do think that's a way maybe for all these years later to get some modicum of understanding.
To at least point at what were the real burdens.
Yeah.
This might be a good time, or at least pretty soon, to show it.
Yeah, let's show a clip. Yeah. Let's do it.
Shall I go ahead and do that?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yes.
So I'm supposed to be the technical one, which means we'll have a catastrophic crash. All right. So give me a second here. You can clip me out as I do these exciting things later, I imagine. Okay.
No, it's really
make sure.
compelling.
You would not believe the leadership qualities I'm exhibiting as I click these tabs.
It's quite a dilemma.
Hey, John, this is why I was such a powerful leader doing Burden of Command. Okay, let's see which mistake I can make now after that remark. All right, we'll start with the trailer. It's about 2 minutes long. This will be, more directly useful for the YouTube audience. Oops, let me go to the tab. But it will also, we'll narrate a little bit and talk to the audio audience. Okay, so I think I'm good to start. Do tech check, everything happy?
Everything's good.
All right.
Good.
So we'll narrate as things happen, and let's go. And I hope you'll hear and the sense of the men versus mission, the burden, and what John was just talking about, the costs, and the real people are involved. The 7th Infantry Regiment heads into battle. Between historical photos, men from New York, Kentucky, Wisconsin. Many are boys, fresh from high school. The Nazis are determined, although the Vichy plans, but we simplify. That every GI dies. We keep them alive. We have Total War artist Marius Kozek. Burden of Command, a tactical leadership RPG. You're seeing a tactical map. Step up, step out. The crack of a rifle. And there's a sniper. Let my men deal with that. Or should I use myself as a decoy or let the men fight through real historical scenarios? I'm going to pause here. Sicily, July 1943. To help spot for his bazooka team, Lieutenant Colonel, I'm going to say it wrong, Heintkes walked into the street to use himself as bait. I think we'll get a decision here, and then I want to say some things. No, actually, that's summarized. Let's have you speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, so this is actually a real event that did happen in the Battle of Sicily. Very interesting, I think, in terms of the scenario, but a little bit about the background of this particular individual. This is John Heintkes, who actually was born in Germany, but his family immigrated to the U.S., and his mother married a soldier. He always wanted to be a soldier, and so John went to West Point. And so by World War II, he's a very young battalion commander in the 7th Infantry Regiment. That means he commands about 800 soldiers, roughly. So he's, I think, all of 26, 27 years old. Wow. Very, very courageous guy. Absolutely. Think about all that responsibility for several hundred people at that age. I mean, that's crazy. And so he's a very dedicated soldier, of course, and very savvy. He will eventually retire as a 3-star general later in his life. But in this instance, the sort of background, the context is that you're fighting on Sicily, and a lot of the population is very pro-American, but you also have some hardcore fascists and Italian army and the Germans in the mix, and you don't necessarily know. So when you go into a town, danger could lurk everywhere or nowhere, and so it just kind of depends. So you have to be quite wary. So in this instance, there was a very, very difficult and tenacious sniper who was causing some damage. And he decides this is a leadership decision. You know what? I'm going to lead from the front by using myself as bait.
Incredible.
I mean, it really is. And so good leaders a lot of times are lucky. And Heintkes was lucky. So the whole idea is there's the bait and switch that he's going to expose himself, and he's got other guys waiting to spot where the sniper is. And, and that's precisely what happens. The sniper reveals himself. And, Heintkes' soldiers basically eliminate the sniper. They killed this person. But boy, you talk about a dangerous way to accomplish that mission.
Well, so in the game terms, so those who can see the video, but you see a literal decision, like choose your own adventure kind of decision pop up where you are that person. We will put that, we might put you in that situation, not literally exactly at the same town, but pretty much same situation. There'll be a little icon in the corner where later you can mouse over and find out the real history like John just gave, but you're at that moment as a leader. Now, we know it's a first-person shooter type game. What would you do? You would pick the standout, and of course, it would turn out to work wonderfully, and what a hero you are. But of course, in real life, some of the leaders who did do things like that, we don't hear about because maybe they died very early in their career. Junior officer casualty rates were horrific for the U.S. Army. John can probably quote it more carefully. But when you step out in the game and you make that decision, we will roll dice do some math around. We actually have a skill that you can do this at any time. We call it a grandstanding. You can stand up or expose yourself to rally the men. John may want to tell an Omaha Beach story on that. And if you survive, huge morale. Remember morale, psychology in the battlefield boost. All your units around you may have been in trouble from, say, that MG-42 fire, are now rallied, which means the morale comes back and willing to fight because, my God, what an example of personal courage. But we roll dice, and if the dice don't go in your favor, you actually get shot down. And guess what? That's not good for morale. You may have the exact opposite effect on your units, and possibly you are dead. We will give you a new captain to run eventually, but that captain will be dead. You probably have screwed up that battle now. And so it's all very nice to quote these heroic things where they worked because they're dramatic and compelling and admirable, but often they didn't work, obviously. And so we try to capture that too, that these are real decisions in the sense that not only they're historic, but the cost will be paid sometimes when things don't work out.
Yep.
So shall we continue, or do you want to talk about?
Continue.
Let's continue. Okay. So now we're seeing a map. Flags, Italian soldiers spilled into the streets, hand raised. Grant warily. He's your sergeant. Lead sergeant levels his rifle. They still have their weapons, sir. So keep fighting or accept their surrender. What will you decide? this case, maybe you accept the surrender. That is something we do in the game. See another map. Now there's been an explosion in the map. The captain's down. Incoming artillery. Leave him? We have to take out those guns. Or he needs a medic. Grab him and fall back. Men versus mission, right? How will you lead your men? Will you give them victory? Need some more photos. Now we're seeing portraits. So Cordell won't return home in disgrace. You are in there. Effect. That's actually a mechanical concept in the game. So Ash, we're seeing our portrait, can live up to his family legacy. Will you bring them home, like John spoke of earlier? So Jack can finally go to college, right? They're depression kids. They have ambitions. And then there's some nice quotes, we hope, saying where people and leading game people thought the game was worthwhile. So that's an example. That lays out the groundwork, right? You're responsible for people with real lives, like real commanders were. Yeah. Okay. Let's get back. Let's stop sharing for the moment. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, that shows you that, I mean, every person in that unit has a subplot, right? It has a background. I mean, and so there's, who knows what the motivations are, or the fears, or the unique responsibilities, the burdens that they're carrying too. Ash with his family legacy, Grant wanting to go to college, just a couple examples. Of course, there could be 100 different. I mean, you've got 190 guys in the company, 190 different motivations and burdens and backgrounds, and so. It's all about the human relationship and the discourse, which is so incredibly breathably real. That absolutely that is the infantryman's burden.
That really gets my passion going around that in a sense. So my father was I said, a history professor. My mother was a ceramics teacher. I know like the people hosting the night are running so admirably and aptly D-Day Memorial. Right? This connection to us, what I think about sometimes when I look at people, and you alluded to subplots, right? Each of you listening to this podcast today, you are in some sense the hero of your story, right? You're living your life and your story. You have ambitions for yourself, your family, your friends. You've had things happen in your life. You have a narrative. Well, what if you're 18 on the damn beach in Morocco and you have a plan? You're going for your football career or your school career. And your story just ends. I mean, each of those people lying dead on the beach or wherever, they had a heroic story that was going to be their life, and it's over. I mean, that's terrible when you think about it. There's a compelling book we read early on this kind of topic by Carl Melentes, who is a Vietnam vet, called I want to tell his story briefly. What is like to go to war? And I had the writers read this early on. And he was a remarkable individual. He went to Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, extremely prestigious. And he resigned to be a lieutenant in Vietnam. How many people did something like that? And then he had, of course, searing, I think it's a good word, experience and so forth, wrote about it, became a novelist. One of the things he says in the book, he says, and then I'll get back to the game and the point that John was making about this human cost. He says, war is inherently spiritual. Now, why are we saying, oh, war, what a wonderful thing, and how spiritual it is? He said it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good place. He called it the Temple of Mars, which is a wonderful term, right? The Greco-Roman god of war. It might be a terrible place, but it's inherently spiritual because death is on the table, people, and what lives are ending or not, or being saved. It can be places where you see the best of humanity. People risk themselves for their brother or their sister, right? So it can be beautiful. It can be obviously terrible, but for many vets, right, it's something that they remember the rest of their lives because they were on a deep spiritual theater. And so he said, you're entering the temple. And so we don't put this explicitly in the game, but the first act of the game on the landings in Morocco, we wrote for ourselves across the scenarios, entering the Temple of Mars, and the writers worked on that. So in fact, a bit of a spoiler, we go out of our way, like evil writers do, to bond you to a non-player character, NPC or two, early on that, strangely enough, not by chance in this case, will get killed. And then their life spills out of if you search them, as you do for because you want to get their last, not remains, whatever their goods to their family, you find a blood-stained photo of his football picture, right? And you find out his ambition, this dead boy on the beach, like John a little bit, was going to be a football player or hoped to be, but that story is done. And his family will remember what he might have been as opposed to what he has unfortunately become. So we try to touch on those topics, and that's why we got a lot of vets involved, because those are terrible and also beautiful, sometimes real stories.
Yeah, that's the stakes are very, very, very high.
Exactly, no higher,
and the consequences are immense
and final sometimes.
And final, and that's in studying the history of this unit. I mean, with the 7th Infantry Regiment fighting the better part of 2.5, 3 years. Think of how many times an infantry unit turns over. With
how
all those
stories?
casualties, how many stories there are, how much loss of human potential is there? Because of course, most of them are very, very young.
Yes.
What we would think of almost like college age or whatever.
The old guys are 26.
Yeah, very old, very old in that context. Yeah, I mean, no question. So it's that's what I find compelling in trying to study that and bring that to life again. I think it gives us something of the sense of the cost of World War II. And I think that shines through in Burden of Command as well.
But that's what shows through in the whole enterprise that many of us are involved, right? John tells a good historian trying to do history to reach the public, which is an admirable goal, is telling human stories, because that's what connects to us. Spielberg and others doing Saving Private Ryan, they're connecting you to lives, to individual humans. We're trying to do the same to create empathy. We go out of our way, the portraits that feel like real people, voiceovers that are well acted, we hope, dialogue that tries to connect you to real people in their lives and dilemmas and what was happening maybe at home with their families and so forth. So, and that your memorial, right? These are attempts or reenactors. Some of your audience probably reenactors. Attempts for us to connect these people who served, who were as alive as us once, but on a beach in Morocco. That's a sort of sacred thing to do. And I think many of us here are involved in trying to make that connection or fascinated by it, right? That remarkable thing to reach back to people who are no longer here. I mean, that's a strange thing, really.
Well, Luke, you in the game, you kind of really force the player to think about, I like what you said earlier, talking about morale and just how important all these individual actions are on everyone, and truly how that can impact the outcome of
combat effectiveness, not just lives
situations. Yeah, I mean, and every single action that you take as a leader has that effect on the morale of your troops, and that you have to take all of that into account continuously, and all of these difficult situations. So I really like how you do that. And your archival material is fantastic. I mean, it really makes it so enjoyable to go through that. And, you can focus more on the story part in the game or more of the tactical, but I love that throughout, no matter what you do, you're seeing all these images and really getting the story. It's like you're you're in the story, but it's all unfolding and you're learning so much along the way. And I think that's
we're trying to kick you not only to these fictional characters, but the real characters. I mean, I had a personal experience that was interesting. Maybe we should play one more segment because John can tell some interesting history around some non-obvious leadership things. But I remember after we'd just been doing the fiction from the writers, and John was reading through them and giving us critiques and so forth on the history and so forth. I just saw a photo of some poor, forgive me, bastard, some poor grunt hiking through the snow, marching through the snow, probably in the Vosges in the French mountains, miserable. But when I looked at the kind of photo before, there's a guy, marching through the snow. But due to the writers, I was looking at it differently, thinking, oh my God, you poor bastard, and still not having any sense of the real connect. The reenactors have a little more, right? But having much more empathy and sympathy for that real anonymous individual in that photo. And the writers had just put me through a situation where I had to make an interesting, not very glorious, but important decision was, were we going to stop on the march to get them some hot chow, some hot food, right? Some warmth, because there was a tent struck, but we were on a schedule for the mission to get to, a battle. But it was a balance, because John taught me this. I remember, actually, that's a good lesson you taught me in the book. You think of morale on a battlefield. It's How are you being led? How many bullets are being shot at? How suppressed? Or what's your cover? All the tactical things. But John said, well, actually, a lot of morale is how much sleep have you had? How much food have you had? So actually, when you're making a decision about should you stop to give them some hot chow, that in some sense is a military decision, not just a be nice to the men decision.
It is, and it's also the very real decision, because remember, most of their time is not spent trading bullets with the enemy.
That's right.
Most of the time is dealing with the conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the challenge for the infantryman. He's basically living like an animal. I mean, you know what I mean? And not getting sleep and being on 2 hours watch, 2 hours sort of sleep each night, all night in a foxhole, existing,
Miserable.
Miserable. So if we progress the history of the 7th Infantry Regiment forward in World War II, from Sicily on into Italy in the fall 1943. In Italy, they're fighting in horrifying conditions deep into the mountains of Italy, where if you get wounded, I don't know that we can get you out. I mean, they're using mules to evacuate people. And it's cold. Supply is an issue. Maybe you're on eating 1K ration a day, something like that. And then, so it's a little better later on at Anzio, but then you're under shell fire all day, so you're going about your mundane life, basically living as the subterranean mole, except at night on patrols or whatever. And then, so how do you deal with that? Then later in South France, it's good weather, but still, your danger could lurk anywhere. And then, so the Cotton Builders go through all these different phases in World War II. And all these kind of personnel iterations where you've got people constantly coming and going.
New leadership.
Statistically speaking, I will tell you that let's say you're one of the guys who sets foot on a Moroccan beach of Fadela in November 1942. If you are still with the unit, say as a rifleman, a machine gunner, a mortarman, a bazooka man, by the time you get to Hitler's home in Berchtesgaden in 1945, you're the ultimate fugitive from the law of averages. The ultimate.
Let me say something in the game. So, and John's book, I think we were drawing on John's book on this. So if it's early 45, late war in Germany, the commanders and the men were thinking, boy, I don't want to be the schmuck who dies, in March 45, because the war is obviously ending. And the leaders, if you're a decent individual, you're thinking, do I really want to do this one more hill, one more town, and quite that way? Like, I'll use an example that your audience will see in Band of Brothers. There's a wonderful historical scene where Captain Winters, late war, right? He sent men across dangerous mission to capture some German prisoners for intelligence. And they do it quite successfully. And they come back, I think, without casualties or minimal. And so they're very relieved, right? And then he lets the colonel know, whoever, and the colonel says, do it again. And Winters, who was, Quaker-like practically in his morality, he decided to lie. And I would put in men versus missions term, for the sake of the men, he was not going to send them in his judgment one more pointless mission that would probably result in needless deaths. So he gave a false report. Now, he didn't do that much. And of course, if that generally happens, that's, you can't do that in the army. The army won't function. But late war, there's a sort of growing pressure, and we put that in the game. Our characters survive a little bit more, but if we do it right, you definitely will have people who are dead that you knew personally in the game by the end of the war, quite a few. But maybe Dearborn, one of our characters, is sitting there in 45, and you're thinking, Dearborn, my God, he served me since the beaches of Morocco. Am I really going to send him up this stupid hill for what probably non-existent tactical advantage at this stage of the war, right? Or maybe I should just send the young Lieutenant Thompson, who hasn't paid so much. On the other hand, Lieutenant Thompson, poor guy, he's 18 or 19. Maybe he deserves maybe it's more moral to send Dearborn, or maybe I just need to be thinking about this and just send the most effective, right? Those are hard decisions. And now we could show a little segment, maybe show the French one. Do you want to do that? Because that's, again, interesting ones.
Okay. All right.
I don't care.
Whichever. We can.
How do you want to go?
John, did you have a question?
I'll make a point that I think will answer some of our listeners, because they're probably wondering by now, why are you talking about a video game? And, because we have a lot of history buffs and the kind of guys that are going to read everything John McManus writes, and they may not realize
they admirable, yes.
Yeah. and they come to visit the National D-Day Memorial, but
these are the best people.
Yeah, well, but they may not realize the extent to which this is an entry point for a lot of young people into the subject of World War II. We're talking about a generation, and I see them all the time during the school year. They come for field trips. They probably have never met a World War II veteran. Never heard their story, and we can present this history at the memorial, or they get it in the classroom, of course. But for a lot of kids and especially males, I have to say, in my experience, they really become interested in World War II because of these games. And there are a lot of kids that are going to play your game that probably aren't going to read John McManus's book, at least for
not till after they play the game. Now they're engaged.
Well, exactly. And it really is. Once upon a time, we were introduced to World War II history from movies, from TV shows.
Yes.
Probably, when I was 10, everything I knew about World War II probably came from, John Wayne movies and Hogan's Heroes.
Yes.
But today we get a lot of kids who really know, maybe not big picture, can give an outline of the events of the war, but boy, they know what it was like. And so I imagine that's one of your goals in doing this game, is to introduce the next generation of World War II buffs. And I was joking earlier today, we want to get them engaged so they become donors to the National D-Day Memorial. We go on.
Well, that is for the best,
and then write us donation checks. But
keeps the story.
Really, our goal is to teach history, and this is a method that I think some of our listeners may not realize how important it is for a lot of these young people.
John will probably say something about students in a moment, but I want to commence John first. So remember, I'm the son of an historian. So I had a lot of exposure to academic life, and, I had my own doctorate, so I saw academic life. And professional academics, they want their careers to succeed. They want tenure, etc. And there's a game to be played in terms, I don't mean that too nastily, but they need the approbation, fancy term, right? The approval of their peers, often judged by how many papers or books are published. I remember how critical it was for my father to get his career going, to get a book published. By the way, he was a young fellow professor with the author of Band of Brothers at Johns Hopkins, and I just remember the stories getting going. My point is, it is risky to put yourself out there in the public eye as an historian or any form of academic, because your peers may judge you as not serious, the lesser ones, I would say. And my father had to, judge those risks because he wrote some more public books, etc. And John has shown, maybe it's not the courage that we're talking about on the battlefield, but it is a different kind of courage, career courage, to allow himself to be associated with the game. And I don't mean this in a just casual sense. It is a real risk. I saw that living within an academic family. When I would approach older historians, I got the clear sense, even though I could reference my dad and they were pleasant, that to them, game was not a credible thing to do, nor they would tarnish themselves or diminish themselves in their reputation to be associated. John was the opposite. Interesting enough, the youngest historians now are on the out and completely opposite side of the tier, where they're playing games a lot and they're going out of their way to connect the dots. But I'll yield to John to talk about the classroom. But I remember I have 3 boys coming to me and shocking me in the kitchen one day and saying, "So, Dad, we were playing Total War, and we used the turtle tactic, which is a Roman tactic of shields to make yourself into sort of a visible turtle with shields to protect yourself." And I was like, oh my God, my kids are talking about turtle tactics. Things have changed in the world, right? They're talking about archaic, long dead Roman tactics. That's a good thing. But
that's a great thing. Yeah. I mean, I find it, and I know you do too, John, that video games are a great gateway drug, for kids to get into World War II and to study. And I mean, I see that all the time, that these young people have played various video games, and they're just kind of interested sometimes to explore a little more of the real history and see the context. Maybe it gives a little more insight in the game. Maybe they get better at it. Maybe, maybe they kind of grow beyond the game and start to get interested in doing historical research too, or maybe it helps them get into games that much more. I had one of my advisees a number of years ago. Now he works full time in video games. I mean, 'cause he put his history degree to work on that side of the house. And as I say this all the time, I mean, if it comes down to movies and miniseries and TV and video games and books and podcasts, so I say all the above. Let's do it. That's the whole point, is to enhance understanding, to get interest out there, to learn new things and to use the history. So to me, it's really from the beginning of my career, I was determined not to do history just for 10 other scholars or whatever, whatever might be expected in that sense. To me, history should be, universal and useful and practical and pragmatic and admirable and fun and enjoyable. So to me, Burden of Command is just a really good opportunity to use to be teaching history, I suppose, just maybe in another context, which takes a different kind of skill set to make happen, like Luke has.
I'm going to take a slight risk and talk about something modern and present in a history podcast, but I believe and I suspect much of our audience may too. Look, we know that young males are struggling to some degree in at least U.S. That's perception, I think, of many older people. And one of them is around role models. Now, there are many forms of role models. I hope my mother was a role model in ceramics and so forth, and art commitment. On the other hand, obviously, I hope the people we talk about in John's books and so forth are, in some sense, implicit role models of behavior, of taking responsibility, or maybe sometimes not, but hopefully mostly taking responsibility in terrible situations like we've been describing. And I see interest from young people. I think they're hungry to see some of these situations and to test themselves, at least in some sense, right? I would say there are quite a few young men who came, and we have women come too, but there is a preponderance of young men come who are saying, I'm going to, ROTC soon, or I'm going to be going to boot camp soon, and I'm really interested in your game, and so testing myself, because here's a chance, right? They're wondering how they'll be as a leader. And maybe by putting them in the situations that John's books have conveyed, I mean, those are real situations. So we are putting them. Somebody in the audience last night asked about, could you take some of these situations? We may show on a little bit later, these unusual things dealing with civilians that soldiers in Iraq or Afghanistan, other places deal with. These are complicated moral situations to decide how to behave as a person. And I think it's to the great benefit of the country, frankly, to educate people, not just on the battles and who won and where was 5th Panther or 3rd Division, but how do people comport themselves in hard situations and handle them. That's, I think, why the movie's engaged too. I mean, Spielberg's a morality play story, not just a battle.
Yeah. Exactly.
Let me throw out the caveat that's just like a World War II movie that might get a kid interested in World War II. It might be a good movie or it might be a bad movie from a historical standpoint.
Right.
And I think the same
Bad
thing
lessons could be taught.
Games. Some video games are more instructive of history, and some are less so. And so I will say congratulations on producing something with actual his images, actual characters, actual circumstances, even oral histories played in, which, by the way, Luke, is probably a good opportunity for you to throw in another of your clips.
I will. And John, let me say one more thing, what you said about how we understand war. So there's a really interesting book I recommend called World Within War. And it's basically a look at what was the psychological, emotional, social experience, primarily U.S. Army, but other ones going to war. And in World War I, people understood the war and Civil War. They understood it, saw through the metaphor of the Bible, because that was their core prism for thinking about the world. And then in World War II, though, like you said, they were going to war thinking it was going to be a John Wayne movie. And they were shocked. You get description, shocked when they go on the battlefield and somebody's dying here, maybe, and you can't see the enemy who shot them, because strangely enough, the enemy doesn't really want to be seen, right? So the disconnect between how the movie portrayed the war war and their experience. And then modern, same thing happens. Soldiers, it's very clear now, they go to war, and their metaphor for war is games. And think about some of the games we were talking about earlier. They're going to be some very unpleasant shocks for what war is opposed to is what some games may have taught. So those I don't want to get too on criticism, but we can all think about that's very interesting, problematic issues about what lessons are they taking to the battlefield or not about what it will be like. Yeah. Okay, so did you want to add anything or
yeah,
we'll go one more clip?
Let's do the Alsace.
Okay.
Talk about it.
Now talk about a complicated situation, not trained for probably. Yes, okay. And again, while this will be in the game, it's thanks to John that we knew about these situations and it's drawn quite directly. Let me get rid of, let's see here. Give me a moment here. You may want to pause while I get the technical corrected. There we go. Okay. Let's see. So we want Colmar, yes.
Yeah, Colmar.
Okay. Time a little bit, give you something a little different. All right. We're ready. Let's full screen it. Here we go. Change context and time a little bit, give you something a little different. So now we're in, it was summer, now it's November 44, and we're in Alsace, French province near the German border. And let's see what's going on. Hey, get your hands off her! A deep voice, one you know well, echoes down the street ahead. You can see it's rather miserable weather and we're in some little town. Like we talked about.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm tempted to mouse over, but I think I'll let John and Paul comment on what this picture could mean. You hurry around the corner to see Sergeant Crosley with shoulder squared and bar aimed at a crowd of locals. So the narrative will get it across, but we're seeing historical pictures here, not what you'd expect for a war game. You're seeing obviously some villains. There's something they're upset about someone. It looks like it could turn violent, and that's kind of what the picture is conveying. I'll back it up with it. But after this, I may mention the pictures, but you'll hear the narrative in this choose your own adventure situation from the reading. Aimed at a crowd of locals who look mad as hell. They cry out in naked malice, not at Crosley, but the young woman in a torn coat who shelters in his lee. She looks no more than 19. There's Crosley. I said leave her alone, you hear? Crosley bellows, but they yell back in thick Alsatian accents muddled by rage. Only the muzzle of the cotton baler's automatic rifle keeps the human tide at bay. For now. Jesus Christ, Grant mutters under his breath. What kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into now, you dumb ox? This could be a job for an officer or one stalwart sergeant. So now we've got a choice. Let's go find out what's going on. Know what you do. I have Crosley stand down, don't get involved, walk away. Well, part of me is tempted just to not get involved. We got a war to fight. On our hand, we are sort of the new Law and Order movie in, right? The troops, right? So I do feel a certain responsibility. And regardless, I'm realizing as a leader that Crosley, one of my reports is in some situation. I can't just blow it off. Well, I guess I could send him leave, but let's go over and find out what he's got himself in. Direct leadership, rightly or wrongly. Crosley stiffens when he sees you approaching. Captain, I can explain. The crowd turns towards you. They might not understand what Crosley's saying, but they sure as hell understand the salute he sends you away. Not to mention the firepower you and your men. Sorry, got a little technical issue there. But they sure as hell understand the salute he sends you away. Not to mention the firepower you and your staff carry. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Captain. Your barman insists. But these people were attacking this poor girl. Someone in the crowd shouts something dark. The dam breaks. A torrent of voices rise again. Despite the accents and strain, you pick out the words putain and salope more than once. I'm not sure what those words are, but kind of guessing I have a sense of them. Marie turns to you. Now, this is Marie on the left. She's actually... she's a fictional French resistance leader, but we model her off several female French resistance leaders. So she does connect to the historical realities, and she's been guiding us. Marie turns to you, and that's a whole interesting sub-issue the cotton balers dealing with French resistance, irregulars. Marie turns to you, her eyes tight with worry. Your sergeant may have, as they say, hit a rake. They're saying she's a collaborator, a German's whore. The young woman in question shouts something back and blinks back tears.
She doesn't deny it, Marie says gravely. She claims she was in love, and the others have no right to judge her. Under all the circumstances, I agree. I've done my share of foolish things at her age, too. But she tilts her head towards the crowd. That isn't likely to change their minds. The young woman remains defiant as she shouts to be heard above the crowd as men and women edge forward with knives and shears in hand. Oh boy. Okay, I've got a decision to make. I want details, what exactly she do. I'm putting her under my protection, or give these people their justice. Well,
You want to comment? Then we can. Everybody, I hope you'll think about what you'll do, and then we'll finish what happens.
I got a lot of comment about the context of this whole thing. This is just so real to the situation on so many levels. So first thing, when the 7th Infantry invades South France in August 1944, and they begin to advance north up the Rhone Valley, they begin to liberate major portions of France. Of course, they're working with what are called the FFI, the French Forces of the Interior, and the Maquis, which tend to be like sort of like resistance militia, often in mountainous areas and whatnot. So who knows who these guys are? What's their training? What's their political orientation? Many, of course, were communists. Many were not. Are they really affiliated with de Gaulle? Are they subject to a military command? How do we work with them or not? Do they have their own agenda when they go into a town? How do we set up our authority versus them? Okay, so we've already got that dynamic, and that's very challenging, and that's kind of a civil affairs thing, but it's really also kind of an operational commander thing, too, in terms of the tangible way we operate wherever we're going as squad leaders, platoon leaders, company commanders. Okay, well, once you're into Alsace, the whole subplot to that is this is a dual heritage province that's gone back and forth between Germany and France over the course of many, many generations. So during World War II, Alsatians had very difficult choices to make. Most of them had dual heritage of some sort. Which side were they loyal to? How heavy-handed were the Germans or not? And so who's a collaborator, who's not? Well, of course, in Europe as a whole, a civil war is going on, in German-occupied places in that sense. But I may look like a collaborator, but I'm really trying to sabotage the Germans secretly. But my neighbors can't or don't know that. Who knows? Maybe this young woman, maybe she really was in love, and of course that happens too. But maybe she has some other agenda for dating the German. Maybe she was gathering intel for some FFI cell that she can't talk about or whatever, and that these other folks don't know about. I mean, there's a million different variations of this. And so now here we are as young infantrymen trained to fight. And here we are in the middle of this social complexity.
You're
so
18 or 19, what to do?
What do you do? Exactly. And so we could certainly, you might say, well, it'd come down hard judgment. Oh, she's a Nazi, she's a Nazi this or that or the other thing, and let's go help these people cut her hair off or whatever. Well, she could be a scapegoat. And there may be a lot of people in that crowd who now find it very, very convenient, and maybe they were cozy with the Germans too. Like, oh, let's blame her, and you're helping them now. And on the other hand, you could put down your boot and say, we're going to protect her, and now the population maybe isn't so good with you. So this is, again, I think, earlier we were wondering what sets Burden and Command apart. It's this kind of scenario, which isn't trading bullets. This is very real, and this is what the 7th Infantry was actually dealing with in the fall in 1944, especially as you get closer to Strasbourg. And of course, eventually they're going to fight in the Colmar pocket, which incorporates major portions of Alsace. That's in like January, February 1945. So it's like, okay, well, what do you do?
Well,
and not just 7th Infantry. This is happening everywhere. Belgium, Netherlands.
Yeah. How many situations, how many strange situations are happening?
So John, what would they do? I've always had the impression this sort of thing was left largely to local control. American forces didn't get all that involved.
They usually didn't get involved, and they would usually kind of step aside because the urgency is usually to whatever is the next tactical mission that we have. And it's like, okay, that's a local thing, and then we go on. Now, that's the 7th Infantry. Of course, the backfill is the civil affairs people and all that who are going to get a little more involved and trying to investigate the counterintelligence corps people, trying to figure out whether there's Nazi spies in the town and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're right, John. as infantrymen, we're probably going to lean toward the not get involved side of this and maybe try and move on usually.
But you may have some immediate, right? The crowd may about do something. You might have to act at that moment, but you're probably, as John says, going to do that. But also, there's also what you might want to do as a civilian player versus what a soldier's been trained. So we had an interesting question last night, of which the gist was, I don't have time to give it all, but there's a decision we gave the audience last night, and without exception, everyone picks rather nice options to handle a very difficult situation. The historical commander, Lieutenant Spears and Band of Brothers, actually chose shooting an offending sergeant and is exonerating a court-martial. My point is, no one in the audience has ever, when I've asked that situation, ever picked the one that was picked by Lieutenant Spears. So here, a civilian player may want to be nice and help and do better things, but really, maybe you have to be a little hard about it, the way John's describing, and leave something unpleasant going on because you have greater responsibilities, right? You have a responsibility to the mission, not in this case to the people. As a general theme in the game, we have men versus mission, but that's a broad concept. So, for example, maybe you have responsibility to other units to hold a hill, and your men must die so some other company or a regiment can do what they must. Maybe we put you in a very difficult situation. One of John's books that's a spoiler a bit, and some of you all may remember First Gulf War, the Highway of Death, where many Iraqis are fleeing on a highway, and frankly, they're being butchered by American air power at this point, just slaughtered on the highway. And First President Bush decided to call it off at some point for humanitarian reasons. Now, it was always controversial. Maybe it was the right decision, but maybe it left too much soldiers around. Difficult. I'm not saying what was right. I'm saying it was a hard decision. Well, do you want to describe that situation?
We have that at Montélimar, and by the way, the highway,
in the game too.
The Highway of Death incident in Desert Storm, the 7th Infantry was.
Were they?
Yeah. I mean, not on the air power side, but later on the quote mop up side and trying to enforce the lack of movement on that highway and whatever. But in this context, in World War II, you have a place called Montélimar. This is part of the South France campaign. And, the Falaise pocket in Normandy is very famous. The Germans trying to escape and getting raked over by Allied firepower. Montélimar is that, but on a smaller scale. And the 7th Infantry is a huge part of that. So, again, it's like, how much is piling on? A lot of what you're killing in that pocket are animals, because most of the Germans' mobility at that point is horse-drawn. But also too, there are locals who are trying to get out with them.
Or mistresses.
Yeah, women who have girlfriends who are German soldiers, women who maybe feel that they're perceived to have collaborated and leaving, and men too. So how much firepower do we pour in there? Do we really fight to the finish there? Do we mop them up to try and take them prisoner?
Is there a limit to slaughter and responsibility to the enemy soldiers, right? Because you don't, for instance, we believe you shouldn't shoot down people who surrender. So we do recognize some level of responsibility, some burden for enemy lives. That's complicated too in war. So let's just finish here. We got a minute or two to see what happens.
This is a good decision point. I'd love to just hand this to John and Paul, but I'll forge ahead.
I guess I did a little bit there.
I feel like I've involved myself, and we are sort of the law and order now. So, and I'm tempted to just get more details, but I'm wondering if I take more time, maybe things will happen too fast. I could just put her under my protection. Maybe I'll put her in protection and then ask for more details. Now Marie turns to the crowd and shouts what you've assumed to be a translation of your decision. They don't quiet down. A cobblestone is thrown. Grant dodges. Oh boy. The crowd says they want justice, Captain, Marie remarks, because someone has to say the obvious. Crosley and Grant looked for your orders. Okay, so here's burden of command not on the battlefield, which of course the real captains and commanders had to deal with, and sergeants, and the rest. Stand down. Let the crowd have the girl. Drive off the crowd with warning shots. Okay, well, this situation is obviously deepening and thickening, getting more critical. And being a cool guy I am, we're going to leave as a cliffhanger here. But maybe John and Paul will tell us what was typically done, or the policies, or what they do. Does it feel a little different, John, having to actually make the decision as opposed to write?
All right. So obviously, canned Luke doesn't know that we already did this question. Stupid canned Luke. So I think we're sort of done. Anything else you want to add, John? Or
Yeah, the last point I'll make before we move on is, who is Marie? Right. That's the other thing too. Marie might be the greatest hero we could possibly imagine all these decades later, that she's been resisting the Germans since 1940 or whatever. Or she could be somebody else. I don't know. I don't know. She seems legit.
Here, by the way, is a footnote for those who can see the screen. It looks like a little book icon. And again, you may just want to play the game, but if you're wondering what happened historically, if we were to mouse over, I can't on the video here, but in the game, you might actually get, we often quote John's book in the game. And, you know, we thought we were taking a pretty huge risk putting footnotes in the game, but turned out to be one of our most popular features. People love the credibility, right? That, okay, this is not made up. It's not some cool, fun, neat situation. It's a real one. Real people had to confront this. What will I do? Who am I as a leader? All right. Let's see. So let me cancel the video.
I think April wanted to ask something.
Oh, did I clear? No, I didn't kill things. I think I've survived. Am I no longer sharing? Yes. Wow. Okay, I get people word. I didn't actually crash something. I think. Go ahead.
I know we still have a lot of questions. I know we want to get to Birch's Garden here soon, but before we do that, I did have a couple quick questions, Luke. When you all were putting this game together, did you test it out with various age groups as you were working on it to kind of see, and also ultimately, what was your hope for players to learn from this experience from the game? What do you hope they take away?
Well, I'll answer that first briefly. I hope they take away something about themselves. Our ambition is that it's a leadership journey for you individually, that you'll find out who you are. And we did get feedback that people, you know, it's one thing to read a book or a movie and say, oh, okay, well, I would have done something differently. But then when you're in situations like you're given and you have the responsibility, suddenly maybe the historical character wasn't so stupid after all. And maybe now you see why they did that thing that seemed at a distance so obviously wrong, right? On my experience in reading history and then studying science, you hear some decision, you think, oh, how stupid you were to do that, Commander. Obviously, in hindsight, you should have done that. Then you go read the history from something like John, you're like, oh, well, there was that factor. Oh, and they didn't know about that factor. And they were under pressure at that time. And like, wow. I don't know if I would have done differently. So the game, we hope, is sort of, I would say, two things: teaching you something about yourself, and then maybe connecting, like we talked about early in broadcast, to real people, which to me is what history is, a connection to real people, in a way that gives you empathy. And I hope not just for the historical figures, but for modern soldiers, right? That's why the vets who helped us in the game, because they want people to understand what it means when we send people off to Iraq or Afghanistan, which may be the right decision. I'm not taking a position. We are putting them in situations like you just saw, not just the obvious terrible ones of the battlefield, but very complicated ones that may affect the rest of their lives. We were talking last night about the movie Warfare, which is about Marines fighting in Fallujah in Iraq, and done by real vets, and very powerful at the end of that movie, which is kind of pseudo-documentary. The real vets are there, and then their connections and the cost their family, and there's a guy in a wheelchair from the fight, right? And real costs, brutal costs. And so understanding what we're committing to when we make these kinds of decisions as well, and connecting. Now, the first part of that question, the different types of people and so forth, that's interesting. So we hoped, our goal, and to answer your question one more way, was to reach a broader audience around historically careful games. So the first-person shooters are hugely popular, but obviously they have some issues on history connection. We have the war games, which are very sober and geek out on trying to get the history right, but attract pretty niche audience. We hope by this human connection, like a movie like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers does, we could connect people. We could attract a broader audience. And what we've seen with the people who applied to be playtesters, we had about 600 people apply, was very encouraging that only 20% were the hardcore war game history types that you might have thought would be the majority. We had lots of people who were role players who might have been very interested in playing. I like D&D, by the way, playing fantasy role playing, but thought, what would it be like to be a commander in World War II, and are attracted to that. So some of our most committed people who stayed on the team as volunteers are young people who had never played a war game, a historically sober. And it's not a war game, right? This is not a war game. It's a leadership role-playing game, but I'm just referencing that for the parts that are a little more hardcore, a little more tactical decision-making. They had learning curves, right? Short story on that. So there's a situation from John's book. Maybe you can tell me which battle is. I'm blanking. It's in the forest. They're going down the roads, and you get a Sherman tank. That's pretty cool. You've been fighting with grunts, right? Or rather vulnerable targets. Now you got a Sherman. You send it down the road, blown up by an event, which is German landmines. And players were very angry at us for this. They said, that's completely unfair. I had no control. I sat on the road and they're just blown up. And they're right. It was completely unfair. Guess what? The Germans had no interest in making it fair. On the other hand, it was kind of a teaching moment for us, right? That's all very nice, the real history. But the players haven't been trained for that. A lot of games teach you, oh, well, the tank takes some damage, and you put it in the magic spot where it rebuilds itself. Some of you may know Company of Heroes. It's a great game. It has many very good qualities around these rounds, but some other odd things like that. So, but what we realized was that was a teaching moment. And what we need to do is have Sergeant Grant pop up, say, yeah, that sucks. Because empathy, right? Connection. We learned that from other game designers, right? You want to connect to what the player's feeling emotionally, and then they'll bond with your point. Because it does suck. And, that sucks, sir. And I guess, these German bastards are just of course, they're going to be mining roads. I guess we're going to have to avoid the roads, sir, with our vehicles and tanks in future. So you learn that. And when we taught, players were actually kind of appreciative. Like they felt they'd learned something about real. Oh my God, I guess that's the way it did work. And they became sophisticated. I remember one individual, Paul, who had no experience in these kind of games, but by the end was one of our best players. And he was like, oh no, I'm not going down that road. I know what you're planning. Or, oh, a nice open field. Good try, game designers. I'm sure you've got a German machine gun on the other side on that field of fire. And real commanders do that. They read the terrain. So we had a lot of people who were not tactical or wargaming people. I will say there's one more audience I want to close on that I think is particularly, I hope, interesting to this audience. There's a group of what we would call story players. They play things that are called interactive fiction, which is a fancy industry term for choose your own adventure games. There's a game that went on the cover of Time called 80 Days about Jules Verne's adventures, millions of players. There's a company, Choice of Games, that does these purely text adventures. Our lead writer has one out right now where you can run a little Stuart tank in Operation Torch. Alan, you gotta pay me later for the plug. Called let's see. Well, I don't want to get the name wrong, but if you have a Choice of Games, you'll see it. Alan Geese as a writer for it, and Armored Recon. I think that's it. World War II. Anyway, these players are not tactical players. They don't really want to run around little hex maps and do weird tactical things like XCOM or something. We'd like to serve them, and we get Steam reviews, which I will say are very positive in the technical sense, 81% positive. And they say, we get reviews like, I love the situations like you all just saw. I'm really interested in what you're, teaching me or I'm experiencing, but I'm not a big tactical player. So we've been paying attention to that maybe there's we know there's a percentage of players, probably 23% of our audience, who really don't want to do the tactical fighting stuff, the game, very gamey stuff. They want to do the situations. And so we are going to be this is actually a reveal for your audience. We haven't been talking about since except last night, and now publicly we plan to do what we'll call story packs, which will be like you just saw. There's no training involved to just do what you saw played there, right? You just have to make some decisions and see the outcomes, but they're historically based. We are planning to release story packs that will be a set of things like that. We've had suggestions. I hope the audience here will make suggestions about complicated, interesting situations. Aren't maybe real big tactical battles, but engaging. For instance, we think one that will be coming, here's a spoiler, Pegasus Bridge. British paratroopers taking a bridge at D-Day. It's not a big tactical fight. It's over pretty quickly. There's sort of one German squad at the bridge, but there are a lot of interesting decisions being made at that moment as the paratroopers, and a lot of interesting decisions in the civilian context leading up to it, where civilians have to decide how much they'll risk their family with the Gestapo to help this invasion with the French resistance. And who do they trust in the village? Who is this French resistance person approaching them for help that may help the British paratroopers? Are they really who they say they are, right? I mean, my God, dangerous gray areas. And if you're a wonderful person, well, maybe you get to see your husband or your wife or your children marched off by the Gestapo, as was done. So my point is we will be releasing for that audience, a different kind of audience, we hope, something that they can engage in without having to play a tactical game. To close on that, one of our vets made a suggestion of a very unusual, John, I think I haven't said this to you, but interests you, example of a burden of command situation. He suggested the Bataan Death March, which is a terrible march after the fall in the Philippines of Corregidor, where the Japanese, not having sympathy for surrendering people, marched them brutally with high percentage of people dying on the road. Now that is actually a leadership situation, or must have been, right? I mean, how are you keeping morale together? Those of you who've seen Bridge over the River Kwai has a flavor of that. That is a burden of command situation, but it's not combat. But my God, those are decisions. And a vet suggested that, interestingly, right? So maybe we'll just see some things like that, or things in the spirit of Bridge over the River Kwai, or dealing with, the Great Escape, which were historical situations, right? There are many interesting situations. Masters of the Air covered. What's it like to be captured in a German prison camp?
Let me put John on the hot seat for a moment and point out in your book, you take on conventional wisdom and you take on even Hollywood by asserting that it was the 7th Regiment that was the first unit to arrive at Berchtesgaden at the end of the war. So enlighten our listeners on why they think what they think they know was probably wrong.
Oh, it's not probably wrong. It is wrong. I mean, it's just
I think he's thinking.
It's like if we were saying, does gravity exist on this planet or not? I mean, it really is that simple.
Okay.
So what happened is this: at the end of the war, there were two major objectives for the Allied armies that they were thinking of. Obviously Berlin, but also Hitler's home and complex in Berchtesgaden, which certainly was powerfully symbolic. Hitler's home is where a lot of his ruminations and machinations took place and whatnot. But beyond that, there was concern that some hardcore Nazis would hold out in the alpine terrain, prevalent there. And it's a prestige objective, of course. So as things hashed out, as part of 7th Army, there were 3 divisions that were within striking distance that could get to Berchtesgaden first. The French 2nd Armored Division, the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, and the 3rd Infantry Division, of which, of course, the Cotton Balers were a part. So the orders were really for the French and the paratroopers really to take the lead. But the way it actually turned out is that the 3rd Infantry Division took the lead. And the major reason this happened is because the division commander, General O'Daniel, wanted his guys to get there first. And he makes this happen by the fact that the 7th Infantry Regiment in the lead for the 3rd Division captures key bridges over what's called the Salak River. And then O'Daniel's orders were to them, no other unit gets through here until we are at Berchtesgaden and we take everything. And that is precisely what happened on the afternoon of May 4th, 1945. The 7th Infantry Regiment gets to the town first. Then these guys go up to Hitler's home, which is like kind of overlooking the town. And then what's called the Eagle's Nest, which is another area, it was like a tea house built atop the tallest peak. And it's very hard to get up there. You got to take a special elevator today, and you did back then. Hitler only went up there a handful of times in his entire life. So a lot of the famous pictures you see from Berchtesgaden are from the tea house. The home and the complex had been bombed by the RAF on April 25th. So, several days before this. So all of this happened. I mean, it's indisputable because the interesting thing is that it's in the 101st Airborne records that it happened this way. And their commanding officer, Max Taylor, their commanding general, said the same thing in his memoir. The Army's official historian, Charles MacDonald, said it this way. So it's not just the 7th Infantry saying, oh, we did this. So where did the mythology start? Well, of course, in Band of Brothers, because unfortunately, Dr. Ambrose, who of course was a great influence on me, and I think he's done incredible things for the study of history. I mean, and a colleague, your father. He just kind of took the 101st Airborne veterans at their word because they believed they had been there first, and you know how that goes.
Of course,
the veteran sees what he sees and just knows what he knows. And in a unit, a lot of times you get this thing: we were the first to do this, we were the first to do that.
And they believe it.
They believe it. Of course, they're not lying. That's just what they believe. So an historian has to actually, corroborate.
Yes.
To say, okay, well, let's see if this is actually factual. And unfortunately, Dr. Ambrose in that instance did not do this, and so then it ends up in his book, which ends up in his miniseries. Which, of course, I'm not saying those aren't worthy. Those are amazing historical pieces, and I look up to them. But I think it's terribly unfortunate that this mythology was spread on this. And the reason I say this is I knew so many 7th Infantry Regiment World War II veterans, including the company commander of the 1st unit to go in there, Sherman Pratt, who was a good friend of mine. And that was a big deal to them. This was something they accomplished in World War II that could live for the ages. And then to have someone come along decades later and absolutely, I'm sorry, it perpetrate a falsehood. They really were deeply upset about that. And I completely understand why. So that's why it's always important to me to kind of set the record straight. And I hope I wasn't being too flippant earlier in talking about gravity, but it's just, it's an actual fact. And the funny thing about it is it's not just the 7th Infantry and the 3rd ID record to say it, it's the 101st record. So
I never caught that part.
Yeah. So all Dr. Ambrose had to do was actually look at the 101st records. So what happened then? The 7th Infantry didn't stay there for very long. And so they moved on to Salzburg, and the 101st came in. The French, by the way, were not happy at this outcome either. And so there was tension over that. And so they had a joint ceremony the next day with the French. And then the 101st really took ownership of the area. And so, those guys certainly were there, but not first. I found there was tension between the 101st and the cotton balers. One of the paratroopers shot a cotton baler who then was wounded and had to be evacuated. Wow. And that was in the original record. So I'm not sure, but I think probably alcohol was involved there. But it's just speculative. So anyway, obviously I wrote about that pretty extensively, and not just me. Others have written too. A guy did a whole book about Berchtesgaden and talked about it. And when you go to Berchtesgaden, they have the actual factual relating of what happened, which is good. So I just wish that's one of the downsides, of course, of popular films and miniseries that someone sees something on the screen, they think, oh, that's 100% factual, and as a historian, sometimes I have to be the buzzkill and say, no, I'm sorry, that's just so false.
Two things I want to add there. First, that does show the power of some of the media, right? That becomes truth because you saw it happen in the show. By the way, plug for John. John did a wonderful. Only 1.3 million viewed video, so few people have seen it. Assessment, sometimes buzzkilling, I think, on Saving Private Ryan, you can find on YouTube. So that's a fun one when he's in his let's be accurate mode. But also, there are many things that are remarkably accurate in those films. Remember, the beach scene was one of the first very accurate portrayals of what that experience was. I want to say something on the game in Berchtesgaden. We covered Berchtesgaden. We covered that race a little bit. And you're kind of trying to make decisions, so you make sure you are there first. But then, interesting game design problem. So you get to a map. We did a zoomed-in map of Berchtesgaden. You get to be walking around the Eagle's Nest.
Show the clip.
Should we show the clip? Show the clip.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Actually, I should share first. Let's see. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
you're pushing my luck. I'm going to screw up one of these.
Command really captured it well.
Okay. Hold on. There it is. So it's 3 minutes. We can do the phone, or I can change it.
Let's do a shorter.
Okay.
See the terrain. That picture there is really dead on.
Right. So there's, for those who can see it, we're seeing a postcard, actually a German postcard, so I can't translate it very well, of the Eagle's Nest, etc., seen from a distance. We immediately put you into context. You essentially get a briefing along the lines Sean just described of what your responsibilities. You better get there first. And then you make various choices. And I'll just zoom ahead. And there's, I'm going to butcher his name. Heinkus again, giving you your orders, right? And you better get them done. Here's a perfect example, actually. Here's a digitization of an after-action report, the logs, or the logs at the time of what is happening, so you can connect to that real history. Some contextual maps, etc. But let's close. Oh, this is a wonderful picture. So here they're showing. Actually, I think it is 3ID. This photo, if you look at the, it is. They're on a Sherman. Probably. Well, I'm not sure that is a Sherman.
No, that's a tank destroyer.
A tank destroyer, yeah. And they're going by a very emotionally charged German farmhouse or something, but on the side it shows a very, very interesting iconography. There's Jesus on the cross, and on one side it says 1914, and on our side it says 1918, and yet it's Jesus. So there's some, obviously, John could probably drain that, but that was probably a very emotional story, World War I for the Germans, or whatever that's going to say to them. So you're driving by that on the way to the nest, and there's a picture, historical picture of Goering and Hitler, when everything was going their way, or they're browbeating people before the war started. And then you get in there, and then here's the last thing I want to say in this one. So this is a map of Berchtesgaden. You wander around this. When we first designed it, you can see things like the battered chalet because of the bombing John talked about, a glass structure, a ruined house, some barracks. When we first designed this, we're biased towards it's going to be some tactical situation. So we're trying to think, well, the problem is there really weren't many German troops, if any, around there to fight. How can we deal with that? So maybe we'll have, you think you're hearing false reports, rumors that there are German squads around. So then the players treating it as tactical. Honestly, we did tons of feedback to try to make the game work right. Many iterations. We got feedback, it just wasn't working. They weren't taking it very seriously. It seemed very odd. So we would meet weekly with playtesters and get their feedback and have discussions. And I think they helped us get to the right way to understand this landscape, which I would say to be Pazzo and Band of Brothers, this conveys it too. Really, what this landscape is it's a landscape of reflection. So when you wander around here, it's not a fighting situation. So we got rid of that. And you're under no combat stress. You're wandering around. But what you're thinking about is, the magnitude, like John alluded to for the combat. My God, you are connecting with history as a 22-year-old or whatever. You're walking around Hitler's sort of his sacred ground, right? You're finding his, on the positive side, like Band of Brothers get across, his wine cellar, etc. But you're also thinking, and we do that in the game, you're thinking about who you've lost. The war is over. You're thinking about who died. We try to carry that. We know the game knows who you've lost. And we remind you that maybe you lost Dearborn in Morocco, and too bad he's not here to share this, but he paid in blood so you could be here. And of course, like they get across in Band of Brothers, you're also thinking, oh my God, I survived the war. What am I doing next? Do I, in fact, want to be who I thought I wanted to be before this war started? Maybe I want to stay in the Army. Maybe I never want to touch the Army again. I want to take care of a farm like Winters wanted to do, but some wanted to stay in. Or maybe I'm going to the Pacific, etc.
Yeah, and along those lines, Sherman Pratt, whom I mentioned a moment ago, who was the company commander, the first unit into the Berchtesgaden at Hitler's home and whatnot, he had started the war in North Africa as a sergeant. And he'd gotten a battlefield commission, and he'd become a company commander by the end of the war. And so, to Luke's point, just think about how many friends Sherm would have maybe thought about that day, who he left behind in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Anzio, South France, the Vosges, which is in eastern France, the Alsace, Colmar pocket.
So many places.
Nuremberg, just a couple of weeks before, which is one of the biggest urban fights of the war, and is kind of overlooked. And the 7th was a big part of that. The Siegfried Line, the Rhineland, on and on it goes. And so, if you've reached the end of the rainbow, in Wizard of Oz terms, in a way, it's you are such a fugitive from the law of averages, and you've had this capstone moment in World War II that combat and war rarely offer you, to go and capture this closure, to capture the home of this beast, in a way, as you would have thought of it, Adolf Hitler, who has plunged the world into this terrible conflict, and then to kind of have that taken away from you in posterity, I think would have been very difficult. But at the moment, it would have been a little bit of vindication on some level. You
The
know,
closure thing's very interesting, right? So there's an interesting book out there called The Connected Soldier. It's about the modern by modern cotton balers too, but it's by a colonel who served in Iraq, and I think the first and the second, if I got it right. Fine book. Anyway, some of the vets may resonate if they're listening to this topic. So one thing that's changed technologically is now modern soldiers are connected to the home front directly, right? They could come from a brutal situation with an loaded device and brutal death, like was shown in the Fallujah movie, right? And suddenly they're back in barracks and they could go talk to their wife or their husband, right? That's very charged. That's obviously in many ways, and I'm not making my claims. I'm relaying what the book says. There are many good things, obviously. On the other hand, maybe you're sitting there and maybe I want to protect my wife or my husband at home from this. Or I just can't talk because they wouldn't understand. Classic, right? But what's strange is you've been drawn into conversation with your family, tricky, awkward, that may distance you from your family in some ways. But maybe he made this argument, it would have been better if you hadn't had that opportunity at that moment in time, and instead you'd had to sit there with the people who shared that terrible event and tried to figure out together, reach your closure as a team about what that meant. And so his take on this was, you have to be careful. Maybe it's controlled when you have access. Maybe the culture of the Army around this technology says, well, no, not right now. First, you're going to spend the rest of the day with your men or your peer soldiers so you can figure out your position. Then, of course, you can go talk to your family. So they've been figuring out things. But other examples, when these soldiers went home, they went home on ships. And it might take, days, 5 days to get home on ship. That's a lot of time to process and to talk to others going through a very concrete journey back to a domestic context. There's I can't remember the name of the movie. There's a movie came out in America a few years after the war about all the vets trying to adjust. But you had a journey.
Best years of our lives.
Thank you. Best years of our lives. You had a journey, but now you might be back, in 7 hours, or there are people who do drones or not run remote vehicle, remote aircraft and have to kill people, and they go home that night to the family, and that's not much time to adjust. So we have very complicated situations in modern warfare around closure. One thing these soldiers had, they didn't have connection to their family directly as easily, but they had sometimes things like this that gave them clear closure.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And so we've sort of reached the end of our rainbow here in terms of time. So with a very, very quick concluding question, Luke, where can folks get the game?
Well, first, I think we should be sure everybody knows where they can get the book. See, I've got to stay in.
Yes, book, exactly.
On Amazon and Barnes & Noble or other many fine places. I will not mention because that would be too self-promoting that on the back. No, I'm promoting me here, John.
Okay.
On the back of the book, I won't mention. See, I'm sorry, I got it wrong, John. Let me turn the book around. I shouldn't read the part that says a book that inspired the immersive Burden of Command video game. I would never want to self-promote like that.
No, we wouldn't.
My wife thinks I might have a career as a very bad used car salesman. Okay, but not very long career. American Courage, American Carnage, 7th Infantry. Here it is. Go get it now. It's your cheat sheet. If you play Burden, which you can get on Steam, $25 or $19.99 if you act soon under the next discount. We're going to offer just you if you act now. This is a cheat sheet. What we hope will happen is you play the game and maybe you'll go read right afterwards what the real commanders did and connect more. And maybe you'll be corrupted and find that you're reading many history books for fun.
What a concept, huh? We can't have that.
Very terrible.
Dangerous stuff.
Corrupting the young.
Oh, man.
I will say, by the way, all age groups. We have many people who are older playing the game, not just young.
Yep. It's for everybody, like history, right? That's the beauty of it.
That's well said. Yes.
Absolutely. So, Luke Hughes, it's been amazing having you today. Thank you so much.
It's always an honor and a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
Wait. Come on, used car salesman. I hope everybody has gone or is going soon to the D-Day Memorial. I hope I will get a cut when I go there. If it's not free. Is it free or not? What's the story?
Well, it's a very nominal fee to come, and so we're not
way too many.
federally funded or state funded, so it's nice to have a little bit of funding, but yeah, come on and see it.
No,
It's a
we should all give such a
site.
place.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You can drive on down. You can bring your book and have your Steam. Get on there and download the game, and then visit the memorial. All three at one time. You can do it.
That's right.
That's the perfect day, isn't it? That
It is the perfect
day.
day.
Absolutely.
For some of us.
For all of us, really.
All of us.
Millions.
All of us.
Well, it's been amazing. Thanks so much.
Great questions.
You can email our team at podcast@dday.org. Again, that's podcast@dday.org. If you're enjoying our discussions on World War II and its lasting impact, please subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends, rate it, leave us a review. Help us share the lessons and legacies of D-Day and World War II. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Take care.